Dios mío. Mire, mire ese edificio, mire ese edificio. Adiós.
Vea cómo quedó esto todo, Pereira.
A magnitude 7.4 earthquake killed more than 100 people in western Colombia this week. The worst damage did not happen near the epicenter. It happened in 5 cities more than 100 miles apart, all at the same moment. The general rule is that deeper earthquakes are safer for people on the surface. This one broke that rule across an entire region. Here is what actually happened and why it matters far beyond Colombia. The earthquake struck at 7:34 in the morning local time on Monday, August 10th. Its epicenter was about 3 miles from the town of San Jose del Palmar in Colombia's Choco department, a mountainous region on the Pacific coast, roughly 170 miles west of the capital, Bogotá. The U.S. Geological Survey measured it at magnitude 7.4 at a depth of about 70 miles, or roughly 110 kilometers. The shaking was felt as far as Ecuador and Panama. The heaviest damage was reported in Pereira, where the passenger terminal at the city's airport partially collapsed, and in Cali, where the pediatric and neonatal wing of a hospital came down. Quibdó, Manizales, and Armenia also reported serious structural damage, and all 5 cities were placed under the country's highest disaster alert level, with curfews imposed in Cali and Pereira. As of Tuesday morning, Colombia's National Disaster Management Agency, the country's equivalent of FEMA, reported at least 138 people dead and 570 injured, with more than 2,700 people still unaccounted for. Newly inaugurated President Abelardo de la Espriella, 3 days into office, declared a national disaster and traveled to Pereira to lead the response. Investigators have not yet determined why specific buildings in Pereira and Cali failed, while similar structures nearby did not, and that assessment could take months. What is well understood is the physics that let one earthquake shake 5 cities at once, hundreds of miles apart. That part is worth slowing down for. It comes down to 3 things about where and how deep this earthquake happened. The first is depth. Most earthquakes people picture happen close to the surface, in the top 10 or 15 miles of crust. This one happened about 70 miles down, inside the Nazca plate as it dives underneath South America, a type geologists call an intermediate depth earthquake. Think of a lamp mounted high on the ceiling versus a lamp sitting in the corner on the floor. The ceiling lamp lights the whole room evenly. The floor lamp throws a bright patch in one spot and leaves the rest dim. Move the source farther from the surface and the energy has more room to spread out before it arrives, lighting up a wider area instead of concentrating in one place.
Mira, bebé, estoy en la Plaza Bolívar, me tocó salir corriendo el alcalde. Se cayó, yo creo.
En este momento, en el apartotel 9, cerca de las canchas panamericanas.
The second is how the break happened. As the Nazca plate bends and dives underneath the continent, it doesn't slide smoothly. It stresses internally and eventually snaps, closer to bending a dry stick past its limit than snapping a rubber band that was already under tension at the surface. The third is what several of the hardest hit cities are built on. Pereira and Cali both sit in valleys ringed by the Andes on soft sediment rather than solid bedrock. Soft ground doesn't just carry shaking through, it can hold onto it and bounce it back and forth, the way a tiled bathroom holds on to sound and makes an ordinary voice ring louder than it would in a carpeted room. Energy that arrived from 70 miles down got trapped and amplified right where people were standing. Depth spread the energy wide, the fracture released it hard, and Andean valley geology held onto it once it landed. That combination, and not distance from the epicenter, is why cities more than 100 miles apart went through the same morning. The U.S. Geological Survey classifies this as an intraslab earthquake, the category responsible for some of the most far-reaching shaking events along the entire Pacific coast of South America. That still leaves a harder question, the one Colombian engineers will spend months answering. Why did an airport terminal in Pereira and a hospital wing in Cali come down, while other large structures in the same cities stayed standing? Colombia sits at the point where three tectonic plates meet, and its building codes have changed more than once because of that. A magnitude 5.6 earthquake killed more than 250 people in Popayan in 1983. The country adopted its first modern seismic code the following year. A damaging earthquake in the Quibdó region in 1999 pushed the code further. The current standard, adopted in 2010, requires new concrete and steel buildings to be engineered specifically for shaking, not just for weight. What that history shows, repeatedly, is not that any one city is uniquely unsafe. It's that inside the same city, buildings built or retrofitted after each code update have consistently outperformed buildings that weren't. Whether that pattern explains what happened at the Pereira terminal or the Cali hospital is something investigators have not yet confirmed. If you live anywhere the ground can shake and you don't know whether the building you're in tonight was built before or after your region's most recent seismic code, that's the same open question.
Me tocó salir corriendo a la alcaldía, mire esto cómo está.
Chacho, así quedó el estudio mío, mire. Mire.
For an earthquake this deep, there was almost no useful advanced warning. Colombia does not yet operate a nationwide public earthquake alert system the way Mexico or Japan do. A pilot program using satellite positioning data was still in testing this year. Even where such systems exist, a quake starting 70 miles down gives responders seconds, not minutes. What people reasonably expected to work next was road access. It didn't. Much of Choco was already reachable mainly by boat or small aircraft before Monday, and the earthquake collapsed bridges and buckled highways connecting it to the rest of the country, cutting off the communities closest to the epicenter. What actually moved people and supplies was the air. Helicopters and light aircraft became the primary way to reach the hardest-hit towns, the same way they would after a hurricane that had washed out every road at once. The honest number behind all of this is the more than 2,700 people still unaccounted for as of Tuesday morning. Officials have said that figure reflects downed phone and radio service as much as it reflects the confirmed toll, and it will likely fall as communication returns to isolated areas, not because everyone on it is found safe. In Cali, a 64-year-old taxi driver named Jorge Moncayo was on the street when the shaking started. He watched dust rise across the skyline as buildings came down, and later said he had never lived through an earthquake that powerful in his life. That comparison, from someone who has felt every minor tremor Cali has produced for decades, says as much as any seismograph reading. One detail from Pereira stood out to responders. The airport terminal that partially collapsed had been processing passengers normally less than an hour earlier on what was, until 7:34 that morning, an ordinary Monday commute. Is a magnitude 7 earthquake unusual for Colombia, or is this an especially bad version of something fairly ordinary? Both are true, and they aren't the same claim. National seismic records show more than a dozen earthquakes of magnitude 7 or larger in Colombia since 1900, a rate driven directly by the Nazca plate diving underneath the country at about 3 inches a year, roughly the pace a fingernail grows. Several major outlets have called Monday's earthquake Colombia's strongest in a century, based on the scale of damage and casualties. Other assessments describe it more cautiously as the country's largest in years. A full comparison against every 20th century event will take seismologists longer to settle. What has changed is not really the earthquake rate, it's what sits in the way when one arrives. Pereira, Cali, and the smaller cities of Colombia's coffee-growing region have all grown substantially in the past 25 years, adding people and buildings into the same seismic zone that has always been there. What the data cannot yet tell us is whether Monday's death toll reflects a rare, unusually severe event, or a preview of what any magnitude 7 earthquake will now cost in a region that has simply built more since the last one. So who else in the United States lives on top of a plate doing what the Nazca plate is doing under Colombia? More places than most Americans assume. The Puget Sound region of Washington state, including Seattle, Tacoma, and Olympia, sits above the Juan de Fuca plate as it dives beneath North America, the same intraslab setup. In 2001, a magnitude 6.8 earthquake there, the Nisqually earthquake, ruptured about 35 miles down and still caused an estimated $2 billion in damage across a region that felt it from Oregon to British Columbia. Both Anchorage, Alaska, sits above a comparable system in the Pacific Plate. In 2018, a magnitude 7.1 earthquake there ruptured at a similar depth, roughly 30 to 40 miles down, and caused notable road damage even though the epicenter was several miles from downtown. Both regions share the exact profile that made Monday's earthquake in Colombia so far-reaching, a subducting plate producing earthquakes tens miles underground, capable of shaking an entire metropolitan region at once, not just the neighborhood closest to the epicenter. If you live in the Puget Sound area or anywhere in south-central Alaska, ask yourself this: do you know whether your home was built to withstand shaking that starts 30 or 40 miles beneath your feet, not just the shallow fault everyone talks about? You cannot control whether the plate beneath you slips. You can control 4 things, and it's worth doing them in order of effort versus payoff. Start with your water heater if it isn't already strapped to the wall studs. An unsecured water heater is one of the most common causes of house fires after an earthquake. It tips, the gas or electric line rips, and it ignites. Straps cost under $30 and take about 20 minutes with a drill. Second, keep a pair of closed-toe shoes and a flashlight under your bed, not in a closet somewhere else. Most earthquake injuries after the shaking stops come from walking across broken glass in the dark. That's a 5-minute setup. Third, know exactly where your gas shutoff valve is and keep a wrench near it, not in a toolbox somewhere else. If you smell gas after a quake, you may have only minutes to decide whether to shut it off yourself or get everyone out. That's a 10-minute walk around your house tonight. The fourth is the one almost nobody checks. A standard homeowner's insurance policy in the United States does not cover earthquake damage. It has to be purchased separately, and in most states it comes with a waiting period before it takes effect. Call your insurance agent and ask directly whether you're covered. That's a 15-minute phone call. The Federal Emergency Management Agency and your state's Geological Survey both publish earthquake preparedness checklists specific to your region. Do you actually know where your gas shutoff is right now without looking it up? As of Tuesday, rescue teams were still working through Choco's most isolated towns, reachable only by helicopter, with more than 2,000 people still unaccounted for and aftershocks continuing to shake the region. The lesson from Monday isn't really about Colombia. It's that a fault 30, 50, 70 miles beneath a city can knock down buildings in 5 places at once, in ways a shallow fault never could, and most of the people affected didn't know that fault was there. Do you know what's moving under your city?